Guru
There we,
Singh.
there we are.
How are you?
I am really good. Such a good background that you've got.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we both have the mandala theme going for our background.
Yes, yes, we do. So how have you been?
I've been great. I've been busy. I've been reorganizing. I left social media, figuring out a whole new old way to do things.
And what have you concluded thus far?
I'm putting more energy into my email list and going deeper into cultivating those relationships. Yeah, and doing it old school. I know you've been doing the newsletters daily for a long time. How does that work for you?
It works well. It works well. And I don't know if you just got our letter today from me, but all of my yoga classes are now being incorporated into our 13 Moons platform.
I saw this. Congratulations. You've realized your life's dream. That's so major.
Yeah, because what I want to be able to do is, we have a lot of people in China and Philippines and South America and Africa, that don't have the financial attitude that finances are the standard of living. No, the actual standard of living is, are you alive? Are you truly living? So we are like you, establishing a new trail in old waters.
I'm glad to know I'm not alone in making this choice.
Yeah, yeah. Would you tell me, I want to know where the camera is on this thing. Am I looking at the camera right now?
You are.
Good.
Yes.
because except for an actual camera on these elements, the camera's eye may be missing.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, you're rocking it.
So one of our students, and this is right down your line, one of our students said, have you seen the book? And it's something to do with Chictionary.
Ooh.
And it's saying, and one of the sub sayings is taking the dick out of dictionary. And so the moment I heard that, because of its audaciousness, I thought about, and because of its relationship with words, I thought about you and how, that's your world, my world too. But I don't know anybody else that is as clever with words than you are. I'm clever with words. You take it to a whole nother level.
Thank you. That is high praise coming from you.
and so check out the Chictionary.
I will check out the Chictionary. It's the perfect lead-in to why I invited you on the show today, because I wanted to talk to you about the archy situation. Matriarchy, patriarchy, hierarchy, heterarchy, the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, archy obviously means the arc of, right? And the arc of represents time, right? Beginning, middle, and end, right? In the arc. And Patri, Matri, hierarchy, they are all measuring mechanisms that are quite unnatural. What really needs to happen in today's world in order to find peace? Because as long as there's the sensation of a woman's movement, the patriarchy, you know, the white, mostly white, male attitudes, right? You know, they get all up in arms. And the one thing you don't want to do with a coiled snake is disturb it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the patriarchy is always a coiled snake. And so the idea of feminist movement, you know, it works for a little while, and then the coiled snake figures out how to mess with the messaging,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like everybody should be in deep praise of the word Antifa. It means anti-fascism.
I can
But
get behind any anti.
yeah, exactly. But the fact is that the patriarchy has weaponized it against itself,
Mm-hmm.
against, you know, people who are not wanting fascism.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who are wanting the feminine power might look to do a Dictionary move, a Danny Katz move, and come up with a word that is so not known to the human psyche
Mm-hmm.
that it doesn't have any negative or positive registration. It just goes, oh, for example, you know, there's this whole thing about, you know, Asperger's and autism and the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And because there were so many, you know, negative, I mean, what worse word can you have but Asperger's, right? It's like a burger out of your ass, right? I mean, you know, that's like a shit burger, right?
Sprinkled
And
with some pimples.
yeah, exactly. And so what you know scientists have come up with is this new phrase called neurodivergence or
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent, meaning that they are divergent from the norm in the
Right.
neurology. And but divergent doesn't feel negative, it just feels different,
Right.
right? So I look at all we are beings that need to promote the equality. And because there's so much inequality between the patriarchy and the matriarchy, the women's movement were trying to create that equality. Well, the patriarchy certainly doesn't want equality because that's going to upset their, you know, their comfort zone
Mm-hmm.
that's been comfortably in place for several thousand years,
Mm-hmm.
tens of thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
Because you go back, well, only tens of thousands of years in certain cultures, because you go into a lot of the indigenous cultures and they have learned from the plant world, the plant kingdom,
Right.
that, you know, you do not get survival by creating the strongest element. You get survival by creating the mutual element, the
Mm-hmm.
collective element.
Right.
And so that idea of archy that you brought up is the idea of a measurement, and anything that takes place within the infinite zone, right, which is that zone of elevation,
Mm-hmm.
can have no measurement
Mm-hmm.
because infinity has no location and no dimension.
Right.
And therefore, if we can take out the archy, let's call it the matri and the patri, right? The patri is the pa, the matri is the ma, and that pa is the moment of now,
Mm-hmm.
and the ma is which is the ah, and the is the moment of now, and the moment of the future.
Mhm.
So the Matri is such an incredible idea. And we could even spell tree as Tree to bring us more in touch with the, with the plant kingdom, because they've got it together. They've
Right.
figured it out.
Yeah.
So we go with the Patri and the Matri, and they form the tree of life,
Mhm.
right? And then we don't have any of that sequence that has such a negative consequence.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting because I liked what you said about infinity has no location and no dimension, because I feel like when we're bickering between which polarity construct to privilege over the other, then we're stuck in some sort of distortion of privilege, which is where, I get a little, even changing dictionary from Chictionary, which I think is clever and wonderful. It invokes gender, where for me gender hadn't been in my consciousness, and then that whole realm is so loaded these days.
Yeah.
And I had tussled, the book I'm writing right now, I spent months, looking into Latin prefixes and suffixes, trying to figure how to evolve us out of this archy situation.
Your world is like my world. I love it. I love it, Danny. Go ahead.
I was hunting on eBay for these like old, Latin books. And ultimately I landed on Betterarchy because I realized I don't know what the solution looks like. I know that it's not going to privilege anyone over the other. It's going to be an up-leveled version of what we have. And so that's where I sometimes bristle around matriarchy, because I don't like the idea of privileging women over men. I'm excited for us to evolve out of the polarity constructs altogether.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we do evolve out of the polarity construct, we are entering into the fifth dimension, sixth dimension, seventh dimension, because from the fourth, third, second dimensions, right? We have the fourth dimension in the heart, which is registering time and rhythm. We have the third dimension of the gut, which is registering connection and nutrition. Mm-hmm. The nourishment of space, whether the space contains food or another person or whatever it contains, just fresh air. Mm-hmm. And then we're talking about the two dimensions of the head, which is, right, wrong, good, bad, yes, no, if this, then that, which is the only thing that computers use. Computers only use two-dimensional construct.
Right.
They just super accelerate the speed of it, so it appears to be more intelligent. It's not more intelligent, it's just faster in two dimensions, faster in what you just said, faster in that polarity.
Right, the zeros and the ones.
Exactly, which, by the way, is a zero-sum world, because what you're talking about is the world of polarity is a zero-sum world. Take from one, give to another. That's the world of polarity.
Exactly.
And that's literally what holds the entire material construct together. However, we're not just to be the material construct, right? I mean, obviously, you know that. And your listeners know that. Your viewers know that. We are to be living in a material experience, but from the perspective of the non-polarities of the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and above dimensions. Yeah, so what you're talking about and what's making you, and I use this with great respect, what's making you crazy and absurd. Well taken. What's making you crazy and absurd is that you come from the future where polarities no longer existed at the cultural communicative level.
Right.
Everybody understood the polarities were in the roots of existence, but not in the flowers of relationship.
Oh, I love that.
And so they kept the polarities out of the flowers and left them to be the nutrient gathering in the roots. Yeah.
And so
this drives you, Danny, because you are one driven person. I am one driven person. You know, so many people, your audience is driven. That's why they relate to you. And my audience is driven. They just don't necessarily know if that's okay, and you tell them it is.
Right.
Where to go, you tell them they know where they can go.
Right.
If they just believe in that knowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful trickle down, because I learned so much of this from you, and then whatever future we came from. And then I get to share it with the audience, and then they get to share it from there.
You were reminded of it from me. From me.
Yes.
You come from it. And I was just the loudspeaker that is still and was reminding. And that's what you're doing. That's why you disassemble words so eloquently, because you're telling people, if you can disassemble words, you can disassemble the way in which you've always thought, because the way in which you've always thought has gotten you to where you are, but now you want to go to where you want to be. And so we must disassemble and reassemble.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. I think of it, I get these visuals of how language programs consciousness. And when we're using a distorted language, that creates knots in the consciousness. I always see it like necklaces that have been in a jewelry box for too long and they're all tangled. And then, you know, to really absorb and integrate the new language requires us to untangle those knots. And then those, you know, those pieces are available to make new connections and take us into the future.
I'm sure you maybe already are, but you really need to use that metaphor, because especially every woman, but I do believe every person is going, especially people who might have mullahs, you know, and the metaphor of necklaces in a jewelry box, you know, over time. I mean, not in this moment, I'm only wearing 2, but when I'm teaching, I'm literally wearing between 15 and 25 mullahs. I mean, it is a weight that I put around my neck, right? It's like the old chest plate of you know, that whole thing of the native people, right?
Right.
The beaded chest plate, because it sits there and my heart absorbs it and I can feel it. When I take it off, it's super hot, the heat in these mullahs. So point being, once every 3 weeks, I have to take them individually and undo them, because as you keep putting them on, you keep sort of rolling the mass of and you're absolutely correct. The entanglement, I call it the layers of mimicry. The entanglement is in those layers upon layers upon layers of mimicry. Every moment, mimicry is the moment in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year, in a life, in which we thought, oh, I need to be like that. Right. Or I need to be more like that, because then I'll be able to you know, all of that self-imposed and externally imposed mimicry, layers. It's called compounding, compounding mimicry. And to undo that is exactly what the great masters always talked about in the peeling the layers of the onion, right? It's a very common metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah. it's interesting because when I'm telling people about my work, if I'm, speaking to a new coaching client or explaining it, and they said, "Oh, you're a languaging coach. You just work with language." And then I need to explain, like, no, because language creates these knots in the consciousness. So it's it would be lovely if it were just language, it'd be so much simpler. And there's that deep, heroic, tender work of unraveling those knots so that the new language will really be able to integrate.
I really like the sensation, the visceral sensation that just hit me when you said the deep and tender work. That's a very important phrase for you, Danny.
Thank you.
Because that's another one of the components that's driving you. That's the component that causes you to say what you said a moment ago, which was, I'm not into any anti.
Mm-mm.
In other words, you're anti-anti. You're anti-squared.
that would be my only anti.
Yeah. But yeah, well, anti-anti makes a pro, because makes a 4, because 2 negatives make a positive.
Exactly.
And so that is what gives that tender, is what enables people to feel safe. When people feel safe, they get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And when people get vulnerable, they learn. Because vulnerability is the absorption of the external. When you don't feel safe, you don't want to absorb anything that's outside of you. So you hold everything off.
Yeah. And that's been such a key part of the work that I've been doing, is empowering people to know that their safety lies within, and that does take, it's twofold. It takes this incredible courage and this incredible vulnerability to go into the places that have been programmed to think that they're not safe.
Yeah. I would further say that safety lies within the massive power of the unleashed soul. When you give it the authority to be unleashed. And the only person that can give your version of soul, because it's all one soul, but the angles of our consciousness give it its version. The only one who can give your version of soul is you. And so in order to unleash that power of soul, you have to give yourself permission. You have to have a permit for your mission. And you give yourself that, and you're going to immediately receive massive pushback, both from within and without. And you then have to have the courage to face that pushback with exactly what you just said. What was the other word that you used besides tender?
Deep.
Thank you. That's exactly what you have to, when you get that pushback from within and without, from others and the self, the mimicked self, the self that's, layered in mimicry. Because that mimicry has always been applied when you didn't feel safe. You had to be like something in order to be accepted into something, right? All of that. School. God, We were indoctrinated, you know. I always loved the saying done by a great educator, that we spend the first 5 years of our life learning how to walk and talk, and we enter school and we are told to sit down and shut up.
I love that.
Ah,
It's spot on.
it's
And
spot
crazy, insane.
And so that is what tells children they need, in order to be safe, they need to mimic the teacher, they need to mimic those who are not being scolded, they need to mimic everything except being exactly who they are.
Mm-hmm.
I escaped that because of my parents. They never told me to sit down and shut up. They encouraged me to be what I was. As a matter of fact, I may have said this on the last podcast, but the teachers would send notes home that they couldn't get me to stop talking. And my parents would send the notes back and say, we can't either. And I just thought school was the greatest idea in the world because it gathered all my friends together in one room. So I would get my work done as fast as I could. And I figured out how to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
So I would ace everything. And then I'd get up and start chatting with my friends, right? Hey, this is a gathering. Let's deal with it, right? And so my parents would just say, give him more work. And they'd write back, we did. And so the other side of that equation are those who didn't have the parentage at home that were encouraging their exceptional nature.
Right.
But were encouraging their mimicry to stay safe.
Yeah.
Nature. Those are the ones that you're reaching out to, and you are telling them that the power is within you, and it's the power of your unlimited soul, your infinite soul.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing that is needed in order for that to kick into gear is you give yourself the permission to unwrap it,